So sometimes in life, we don't always get what we think we're going to get. We live in a world where everything is given to us. Our social media is taking over the world. And our educators, are they really educated? So that's something that we need to find out. Today, we're going to be talking about the education field and what's going on out there. Are our teachers really educating our kids? What is going on out there? And today we have a very special guest. So welcome to Let's Get Real. We're here today. My name is Glenda Kroll. For those who don't know, I'm your life coach and reinvention specialist. And my good friend and my co-host, Nicole Harvick, a quantum energy healer, and much more than that. Nicole, how are you doing today, my darling?
I'm doing well. I'm doing great. We have a big storm going on here in South Carolina, but so far so good with the Wi-Fi and preparing for our Thanksgiving here in the States tomorrow. So very, very good.
That's right. Thanksgiving in the States. Welcome. And thank you for everybody in the U.S. and wherever you're catching us from. We wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. And most importantly, you know, everybody needs to stop for a minute and just be grateful for every single moment that we do have in our lives, because you know what? The next moment is never given to any of us. So, Nicole, let's talk about our lovely lady that's joining us today.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to her because I know that talking to many friends that have children in school, there's a lot going on with our school systems here in the U.S. right now, you know, with struggling with not meeting children's needs. Just having directives that really do not enhance our school system at all. And this gal is a former educator, but she has turned into a consultant and a strategist, helping struggling schools adapt to meet children's needs. And I personally think that's what this is all about, is helping the children get through this. She's also a podcast host and she is an author. So I am excited to invite Cheri Dixon to our stage, Glenda.
Hello, Cheri. Welcome, and thank you so very much for joining us today. How are you doing today?
I am doing great, ladies. Thank you so much for having me on today. I'm so excited to talk with you and talk about all of the great things going on in the world.
Well, so we're talking today about education, and that's something that we all need to talk about. And you know what, I know with, you know, my kids are now adults, and not in the educational field, but I've lived through all of it. And, you know, I had to fight my way through because, you know, I always felt the teachers didn't get connected enough with the students and know what's going on, because sometimes it's also knowing what a child is dealing with in their own home environment that can help them learn throughout the progress. But the main thing is our teachers are overwhelmed with so much work. Tell us about what you're finding, since you are the expert that's out there in these classes.
Absolutely. And I would agree with everything you just said. I too am a mom, and my daughter actually is a teacher. So it just kind of runs in the family, right? It's in our blood. I do have to be very transparent. I am no longer in the principal seat. I was a principal for 16 years at 3 different schools. Once I left the classroom, I started teaching really because I really do believe in the power of teachers. I had some adversity in my life as a child, and teachers really were the ones who believed in me and told me, basically, you can do whatever you want in life. You know, you just have to have the right support system. And those teachers were my support system. And I really believed that was possible. And so I actually became a teenage mother. I had my daughter young, and, you know, for most people, they just go, okay, I guess I just have to go with whatever life throws at me now. But I wanted to make sure my daughter saw that I still could fulfill all my goals and dreams, go to college, and do exactly what it was I wanted. So I worked hard. I worked a full-time job while being a mother and a wife and being a full-time student. And I got myself into the school system here in Houston, Texas. That's where I'm located currently. I grew up in small town North Iowa, so that was a big transition in and of itself. But once I realized that I could have such an impact on my class of students, my administrator, my principal actually came to me and said, look, you have potential. Let's start moving you into school administration. And that's when I realized the more people I could affect every year, the bigger impact I could have on the world of education. And so,
And and it's true that, the education field is growing in such ways, but is it growing in the ways that our children need it?
Well, and that's the funny thing. I always took on these schools that were struggling. And I didn't always look the profile, right? I'm going to be honest. And I would get a little kickback going in, and I'd have to prove myself. And especially in my very first school, because I was young, I was in my early 30s. And you don't fit the profile and you're young. Or what are you going to be able to do for us? But that was part of the challenge. And one of the most important things, and you said it earlier, building those relationships and knowing that it doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter what your home is. If you give kids the right supports, they're going to be able to do anything they want. But you have to believe in them, and you have to care about them, and you have to care about the work that you do, for sure. And I think that's where the biggest challenge is in education right now.
And Cheri, I heard you say fits the profile. What exactly does that mean, and who determines that?
Well, the community, of course, is going to look one way. And I took on very diverse schools. They were very low socioeconomics, not the little white girl like me, right, from Iowa. And I recently wrote in one of my books that I have to always go into it knowing that I have to win the community over as well. And in a trustworthy kind of way. They have to trust that I believe in building that community, that I believe in what the children can do in their future, what the parents can do to support them, and that I would stand up for them, and I would be there on the front lines for them. And that's the work that needed to be done in each of the 3 schools that I led, because they had to know that I was there for them, not necessarily for my own agenda.
And I think that's really important. And I love what you just said. If here's the thing, if we could come together as a really tight community, parents included. You see, a lot of times when I see the school system, they leave the parents out, or the parents are more of the secondary. But what they don't realize is, children need their parents' understanding of what's going on, their challenges. Like, what do you feel about the school system where they're graded on how their failures and things like that? And I have different views on this subject. So I'm going to say that before I go into the other stream where I was headed. I want to hear your view.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that question. And here's the great news, Glenda. I'm no longer in the school system, so I can give you my opinion, right?
Good. Yeah.
But I have to say, and it's funny, my journey being from a state, Iowa didn't have an accountability system, clearly not back in the 80s and 90s when I was a child, but not even now. Their system is different. Texas, on the other hand, is the extreme opposite. We have an A through F system here that started we've always had a system here. I came here in 1995, and there was always a system in place, which I can't tell you that I hate an accountability system, because it does keep people accountable, right? We all have to answer to somebody, and we have to make sure that there are systems in place to ensure that we're doing our best work. However, I don't know if I agree with it's one day shot at an assessment and that's your whole, accountability system. But as the years have evolved here in the United States, in particular, and the No Child Left Behind that went into place, and now the Every Student Succeeds Act, there has to be some kind of federal government system plus your state systems. And what we were finding in Texas was that they were saying ours wasn't rigorous enough. And so the state had to make some changes. And now we're on an A to F system. And it was working pretty well, because what it entailed was not only just your overall performance on your assessments, again, a one-day shot, but it also included how your students grew every year, which I love, because that's always my premise. I don't care where we start from, everybody can grow. And if we're not growing, what kind of value are we adding, right? And so growth was always our big goal every year at the schools that I led. And I think that's how we went from failing to succeeding. But after the pandemic, of course, everything in the world changed, and everybody's become a little more bold, I think, and a little more open with their opinions. And some of the wealthier districts, we were seeing that they were not performing as high or maybe equal with some of the lower income districts. And people didn't like that, to be completely honest. And so then it adjusted again. Now, I left the schoolhouse at the end of May of this year, 2023, and our accountability final rating is not being released until sometime in the next week or so. I know what it is, but I can't share that yet. But I have to say, I knew exactly where we would be. I called it at the middle of the last school year. It's exactly where we're going to be. And it is exactly what I said. It's based on how much our students grew. And again, my advice to anybody out there, if you stay focused on growth, I don't care what you're doing. You're working with schools, you're working with people, you're working on your own personal development. If you stay focused on growth, that's where your money's going to be.
Yeah, I agree. I love it. But it's a great outlook because, I've seen and I speak about this a lot on just part of my life is I have siblings with special needs. And so I'm used to all different sides. My children are very high level academic people, but, I see it on all sorts of sides. And it's not about, being an A student. It's about taking your position from where you are and what you can learn from that moment, whether it's a skill, whether it's whatever it is. If we can look at just achieving one thing at a time and building that thing, we build their confidence, their self-esteem. Everything changes. And even a child who is a failing child can switch everything around by just seeing little wins coming along their ways. Changes everything from them. Right.
And I do want to add too, my daughter as well, she's a very high achieving student. She was always in the gifted and talented programs. Mm-hmm. And there were years that I have to be honest, where I questioned her teachers. How is she growing? She came in at this level and she's leaving at this level. What did you do for her? Because we do focus so much on the lower achieving student because we want to get them to that next level, right? But what's happening to those high achieving kids as well? We have a big job ahead of us in the world of education, but we can't just discount the kids that are already there because honestly, they're going to become some of those troublemakers, in the future if they have these high skills academically, but they're not challenged enough.
So we have Sandy has tuned into our show, and she is an educator. And I love Sandy. She's just an incredible soul on top of it, everything else. But this is exactly it. We have to look at these. And just what you're saying is because I had the same exact experiences. My son was way over where he was in his thing. And the teachers were using him as a teaching assistant. And I would say to, what did you do? And my son would come home and said, nothing, Mommy. And I had to teach the other kids of what to do. And, I heard this and I was at that point, they were in a private school and I'm going, what am I paying for? This is not an education. And it was like coming back and then saying to the teachers, you're not giving him anything to build him up. You're not teaching him anything. So they started giving him more work. And I would say, no, he doesn't need more work. He needs a higher level of work of what he needs to do. So yeah, it's exactly it. But I'm not always loved by all the teachers because I am a hands-on mom. I like with our kids. And this is what I want to tell parents. Is no matter who your children are, no matter how old your children are, you need to be part of their lives in school. You need to know. Listen, my son at one point in time was failing English. He ended up being a grad and got a diploma, like never mind a grad, like he got on the president's list in university as an honors student in English. But the thing is he wasn't. And why he was failing English at that time? There was so many health problems with his father. He couldn't deal with any of what was happening in school because all he kept thinking of what was happening with his father at that point in time. And the poor kid was failing, not because he didn't know, because he was so taken by what was going on in his own life about this thing. So if if teachers don't start to learn about their students, it's not just the books. Am I right?
You are absolutely right. And I am going to say this. We've gone through some similar things as well. And it's always, you don't know my kid. And then that's heartbreaking as a parent, right? Because,
Yeah.
and my philosophy was always, if it wasn't good enough for my own child, it's not good enough for me as a teacher.
Right.
And now that my daughter is, or as a principal, right? And now that my daughter is a teacher, that's where I have to step back and say, if it's not good enough for my own child, it's not good enough for my teachers either. And it's, as the leader, it's our job to set the climate and culture in those buildings. And if we make building relationships the priority, and again, focusing on that growth and knowing every kid. Here's the thing. My staff would always comment how amazed they would be. And this is just what I believe to be important. But they would comment how amazed they would be that I knew every kid by name in our buildings. And one year we had almost 1,000 kids in one of the buildings. And I knew their parents. I knew their parents' cars. If I went out to the car rider line, I'd be like, okay, Joey, go get in that car. Susie, get in that car. It's because that's important. When the parents came in and I could say, oh, hey, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, how is grandma doing today? That's how I built those relationships in these schools where I didn't look like the community. I didn't live like the community, but they trusted me because I made them a priority.
And Cheri, I want to take you back just for a moment because you mentioned something about no child left behind.
Mm-hmm.
And back in the day when my oldest daughter, she's 29 now, she was in elementary school. It was like a one teacher to 22 students. We were very lucky. We had a great school district. But as my younger daughter, who was 8 years, younger than her, it started creeping up the amount of children in a classroom till at one point I remember it being like 33 kids to one teacher and maybe an aide. And what happened with my oldest daughter is she struggled in some areas, but my younger daughter, she knew math, but she could not do English. And she fell behind in all her English. And there was really no one there they could help her. So we worked with her at home and, took her to any, how do we stop something like that? When you increase a class size from 22 to 33 or 34, a teacher can't handle that.
So if you want the Cheri Dixon opinion, okay, it's not an easy answer for sure. I have to say that this is so complicated. And, going back to the No Child Left Behind, that's a federal regulation, or was. Now it's the Every Student Succeeds Act. And when the federal government gets involved in education, but then we have to remember every state is in charge of their own rules and regulations with education. Of course, we're always going to have some conflicts and things that get in the way there. But I think there's so many answers to this that it's all going to depend. I think we have to think about funding for public schools. One of you guys mentioned a little earlier that people are taking kids out of the public schools. When they're taking kids out of the public schools, that's less funding for the schools, right? Because they're either going to private, where parents are going to spend their dollars there, or they're going to go to charters where your tax dollars actually go from the schools to the charter schools. And for some families, charter and private, I'm not going to say that they don't work. Some families, they work amazing. But for some families, that's not the answer either. I think the other thing is we have to remember how we prepare our teachers, because we have a real problem in the United States right now. I can't speak for any other country. I know it's real in the Houston area. We are hiring non-certified teachers here in Houston because there is such a teacher shortage.
Really?
We are.
Wow.
And, of course, they have a different contract and they have stipulations, but I hired non-certified teachers. My last year as a principal, we were given the go-ahead by the state because there is a teacher shortage. It's one of the programs I work on in my own business. I have a program that supports these new teachers coming into the profession, because if they go to teacher college, just like I did. And I went to an amazing private university that prepared me well, but didn't prepare me for the real life of the classroom. They prepared me with theory, with the textbook kind of stuff, but they didn't tell me how to manage student discipline. They didn't tell me how to build these relationships with kids and families. They didn't tell me how to put boundaries in place to protect my private personal time. They don't tell you those types of things. They don't give you those strategies. And as a school, you want to do that for your people, but you're busy too, right? As the principal, I had 65 employees, 750 kids. Let's just average 2 parents per kid. And you're taking care of all of those people. You can't give your 10 brand new babies, the best you want to give them because you don't have time. So you delegate that. You give it to a mentor. Well, the mentor also has a classroom and responsibilities and families and grading and everything else on top of it. So that's where my daughter and I came together and put this program together. But I think if we had the right funding for teachers, and I mean just funding as in we don't go over 22 kids in a classroom because that's a stressor right there. We give them the professionalism that they deserve. And on the flip side, I have to say, teachers learn how to become professionals as well, because sometimes that's an issue. We give them the right kind of training and we support them in the right ways. We would have teachers staying more in this profession. We really would, but they're dropping like flies. And
But let me ask you, is the reason they're also dropping is because, years ago, the teacher was a very stoic individual who stood at the class, who commanded respect, not, physically commanded or anything like that. It was just a teacher was looked at as somebody who was respected, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now you hear, because that the teachers aren't being respected. Kids are mouthing off and swearing at teachers. There's a whole different vision. The whole world has shifted, and it's not the same type of profession that it was before. Where I remember in the day where you talk to Mrs. So and so, who was your teacher. You never called the teacher by the first name. Now my children went to school, and in their school they were allowed to use first names, but the teacher. But there was still a very honorable, respectful venture that was held from the top. Now, this doesn't sound like it's happening anymore. So that has to have something to, like, why would you want to be a teacher when you're going kind of into a battleground now? And, so we're kind of shifting in different directions. Are we not?
I'm going to say that again. I think these answers are just very complicated. I have to say, yes, I agree with you in the fact of teachers were regarded differently back in the day, right? But I also believe that sometimes, because all transparency, and my father probably will see this live stream, right? But I'm going to use him as an example. He wasn't always the best behaved student, right? But here's what wasn't happening. It wasn't blasted all over social media.
Yeah.
I know in my hometown, small town, North Iowa, 30,000 people, everybody pretty much looked like me. We had kids that tore those classrooms apart as kids still. But it wasn't being public. It was contained because we didn't have the same kind of social media. I think the other leg to this all is everybody's manner in which we address each other and regard each other in society right now has shifted so much. I don't even want to get on that soapbox right now, but we know that that's true, right? People who maybe would have had certain kinds of respect for just people in general have shifted over the years. But I also want to say this, and I left public education, and I was at a point, 16 years as a principal was a long time, and I needed a change because of some personal things. I had a close friend that passed away, and I was dedicating my life to the schoolhouse. And I realized at that moment I was turning 50, and I just realized I wasn't giving myself any self-care. I wasn't giving myself my own time. And so I wanted something that was going to fulfill me in a different way. That's why I left, not because I hated education or because there was a problem or anything like that. It was a personal reason. But I will say this. There are still teachers out there that get that respect.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with giving respect as well. Conducting yourself as a professional, being prepared and doing your best when you go in there, having the humility sometimes to say, oh, I didn't do so well at that. Maybe I said that. I shouldn't have said that, kind of a thing. So I think it's a two-way street in some ways. Now, I'm not degrading teachers or kids or families or anything at this point, but one of my philosophies is, and it's one of the chapters in which we teach our new teachers, respect is not just given in anything in life, right? Respect is earned, and it's a two-way street. But kids will know if you believe in them and you respect them, they'll respect you.
I believe that 1,000,000%.
Yes, absolutely. So maybe the answer to it is we all just need to think about, how do we treat each other in life? What do we expect from people? How do we speak to people and listen to people? People who have problems and say, I've got a problem. If nobody's hearing them and you're an 8-year-old child, you don't know how to problem solve that. So what do? You get louder and you get, more in people's face, and you do those things because you don't know how else to handle it. But if we all kind of reviewed how we handle things in life, maybe it would have a ripple effect.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, one of the things that I noticed when my kids were in elementary school is that some of the parents weren't picking up the responsibility on their end in terms of teaching their children these kind of things. And they really looked upon the teacher more of a babysitter than someone that's helping their kids with their education. They didn't want, well, that's your job. That's your job. No matter what it was, it came back to the teacher not doing their job, when in fact there were many things that the parents could have helped with that would have made a teacher's job easier. And I saw that a lot. Is that still happening?
I would have to say yes. I agree to some extent, and it's all going to depend on who the families are and who the kids are and the communities and things. But I can say you can find that in the most affluent communities, and you can find that in the lowest socioeconomic communities as well. But I think too, that's where, again, coming together as a community, when you take on a school and you set those standards and those expectations, and then you really walk that talk. If you tell your community, look, guys, we're a team. We can't do this alone. And that's something that from the start, when I was a teacher, that's what I told the parents of my students, because my parents weren't always involved in everything that I did at the school. I didn't want that for my little people in my classroom, right? And so we had to work together as a team. I taught my teachers, you get these parents on your side as team members, your life is going to be a whole lot better. And I could give them those tools. They just had to take the tools and run with them, right? But I do think that we're always going to have these kinds of situations come up. They're never going to go away, and the world's never going to be perfect. But it's about how the leader steps in and really designs what the vision is going to be for that organization, and then steps in and helps empower the people, all of the people, the students, the teachers, and the community.
And I agree with you 100%. And I also agree with the fact that it all starts also in the home. So in your home, if you are respecting each other, if you allow each other to talk, you respect the person, and you hold them high with regard. We all make mistakes. It's just part of life. That's how we're going to learn. And if we all come together on that platform, then you start. It's like the egg starts to form right there. How do we treat our children when they have a problem? Are we telling them to shut up because we don't have the time to listen to them? If we start doing things like that, what do you think that's going to happen when they go out into society? They're going to be showing people because that's what they're being taught.
Yeah. And that's what I think makes everything so challenging and complicated, because in some places you have to also teach the families how to do that. I believe in patterns, right? And
Yeah.
a lot of times I see parents showing up to schools, or any place in society, I guess you could say, but schools in particular, where maybe they didn't have such a great experience in school as a child. And so they already have a block, right? They already have this wall forming. And then if the teacher comes in and says, okay, Cheri's having a hard day today, and immediately now we feel like the next sentence is going to be, Cheri's having a hard day today, and you're the parent, so you're to blame, So I think, again, it's all about how we all work together as a community, how we all agree on what needs to happen, how we all evolve. And going back to what I said at the beginning, growth is the most important thing. If we can all grow together, then we grow together,
Well, same as growing in relationships too.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's always getting, going into the school and learning even about the teachers, and as a parent coming in and connecting up on another level with the teachers. And, like I always believed in sharing what was going on when my kids were going in school. If there's things going on in my family that, I would always key into the teachers. There's problems going on, whatever. So that way they would have a little bit more understanding of what the child was going through.
Absolutely.
And that changed everything.
And that is key. And some families, are a little bit reluctant to share those types of things because they feel like it's
you don't tell people what is going on. I lived through that through my ex-laws. It was always, don't tell people what's going on in your life. And people need to understand. That's how we become more understanding as a community.
Absolutely.
And more compassionate.
Yeah.
Bring compassion into that, because there's not one of us that doesn't have any problems. We all go through something at some point. And, for me, my youngest lost her grandmother when she was in 6th grade, and she shut down for a while. That really affected her. And I told the teacher, here's what's going on. She was amazing. She sent her a card. She didn't cater to her, but at least she knew there was a reason that her behavior had changed.
Mm-hmm. And that's the most important thing. And again, it's all about setting those expectations within your community. If you feel comfortable enough, like you did, both of you, to share these times with the teachers, and then you received in return the compassion, the understanding, the hard work, the coming together as a team, that makes such a huge difference. And then if the opposite happens, that makes a huge difference too, right? If you have a bad experience from that, it's going to shut people down. So I think my answer to everything in the world of education right now is we need to think about the world as we're in the people business. We got to start taking care of people. We're humans, and we got to human a little bit more, maybe.
But isn't that true with everything in our life today? We are all in the people business. Everything in life is relationships.
Absolutely.
And we can build our relationships, we can grow them, or we can tear them down. And in this world that we're living in now, it's really important that we keep building our relationships. We have to have more, just like you said, Nicole, understanding, compassion. There's reasons for everything, but we got to stop tearing people down and start building them up.
Yeah. And then the question becomes, how do we do that? And I do think that alone we can do small things, but together we can do big things in life. And I think if enough people come together and believe that the world is still worth saving, because I think all three of us here, believe that, and that becomes contagious. It's almost like that old Coca-Cola commercial, right? You hand the Coke off to someone. I can't even remember all of it, but I'm not a big commercial watcher, but you hand a Coke off to someone and you're building that team, that community.
Yeah. And I guess that's what's really needed today in everybody's lives, but especially with our young people, because our young people are tomorrow's people. They're the people that are creating our world. As we get older and we don't have that same energy, it's the young people that are taking over. So building them is really the key to ingredient to everything right now.
Absolutely. You know, I think about my own journey. And if I were to ask you ladies, you know, go back to your very first memory that you remember when you were a kid. I think back to when I was little, like I'm 52. And, you know, I can think way back to when I was probably 4 years old, 5 years old with some memories. And a lot of memories stay with you when you either have a very positive feeling associated with it or very negative. And we all know that. And so I think that, kids are sponges, you know, they're going to take in everything. And if we give them the right material to take in, we could change this for sure.
You know, I love that you mentioned that your very first memory, because that triggered in me. One of my first memories was first grade, and my teacher slammed my fingers in my desk on purpose. And I went home and told, I was just horrified. You know, you're 6 years old. And I went home and told my mom, and she, you know, if someone had done that to my kid, you know, I would have had a conversation. My mom just kind of, and it, you know, it doesn't really go back to respect, but I think it goes back to when I was that young. You don't question the teacher. And when in many occasions, we do need to just, at least for our own minds, clarify why that transpired.
Yeah. That's horrible. I am so sorry that happened to you, you know, and see, and then those are the little things that can have so much bigger significance in people's life. And, you know,
well, that can take from wanting to go into school to not wanting to, period.
Absolutely. And my next year's teacher in second grade was just, I loved her so much for her kindness. And she would loan me books from her own library because she knew how much I was just a voracious reader. Even the minute I learned to read, I read everything. And she would, you know, I wouldn't have to check them out. She would loan them to me, which taught me responsibility, because you want to make Mrs. Lundquist happy. You bring her book back, you know.
All in one piece.
Yeah, really. Pages or coloring or anything.
Pristine and absolutely. So
teacher can make or break you.
Absolutely. And that's why teaching is so hard. It's so hard because it matters so much, you know.
It matters a huge amounts, but here's the other problem, like it is, you know, we just talked about it a few minutes ago about the classrooms being so large. And I know in Canada we have the same thing. The public schools are at least 30 kids in a class, if not even a few more than that. That's why a lot of parents are going towards private education, because of the smaller classrooms. It's really hard for children to learn in a classroom of 30 plus kids in a room and still get the same out of it and have the connection. That's like, again, the connection is really what matters the most, right? And that's how a child can learn the easiest, is by having that bond with the teacher. And how do you have a bond when you have to spread yourself over 30 odd kids?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, you know, that, like I said earlier, that answer is so complicated, because it's almost like the system is against us. You know, the system is in place to allow so many. Now, we're pretty fortunate here. We have something called District of Innovations. A district can write certain not grant proposals, but proposals to the state to make accommodations. My last district was one of them who wrote that. We were all part of that, but we really felt like one of the most important things was to keep that class size small. And so we had, you know, those reasonable sizes. We were 22-1 through elementary. Of course, middle school and high school is a little bit different, but those formative years. But of course, then also the drawback, we also had to write in there that we were able to hire those teachers, as I mentioned, that were not fully certified. So you have to do a little give and take right now. And it's not going to be a one solution fixes all of this. It's going to be a lot of work. It's going to be a lot of minds coming together, and it's going to be probably maybe an overhaul of everything. Please don't quote me on that. I'm not in charge of the world, but you are right when you said our children are the future. And if we don't get this right soon, if we don't fix this soon, we're going to continue to see things that are going to just start crumbling.
But let's be a little honest about something here. All these things, we're putting a lot of onus onto the schoolyard, onto the schools, but we have to put some onus onto the homes.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a child at home, it's up to us as parents. And I want to put this out to you because this is how I always looked. It's really us as parents that need to encourage our children how to learn how to have manners, what is right, what is wrong. Encourage your children to read, because you know what? The one thing that most children do lack is the ability to read. And it's because nobody sits down and reads a book. Like, whatever happened, as a parent, my kids never went to bed without reading a book with me.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I only had 2 kids, so we had times where we sat down and we read a book together. We had a time like that. Or I had times where I would read them one-on-one. The older one read a little later. The younger one I'd read first, and then I'd go to the next bed and read the other one. And I built my kids up to reading every single day. Allowance. So I didn't have allowance was given a few dollars for doing certain activities or responsibilities in the house. But when it came to books, that was my responsibility. We went to a bookstore every week or every other week to buy a new book. And it was a book at my daughter, who didn't have a good level in the early years, something at an easier thing, just so she felt the accomplishment of reading, until I started bringing her up. But why? It's the responsibility of a parent to start teaching their children. It's not up totally to the school.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with you 100%. I will have to say, I think I'm a little programmed because the work that I always had to do, I had to think about controllable and uncontrollable things, right? And sometimes it was uncontrollable for me to be able to just say parents should be doing this, because I didn't have control over what was happening in the home after they left. I could teach them, I could encourage it, build those relationships, as I mentioned. But I do think that you're onto something. And, one thing that I think is pretty interesting, I'm just going to use this as an example. I live in a fairly new community. I built my home a couple of years ago, and the neighborhood is still building. And we have a clubhouse in our community, a pool in our community, different community areas that people can go to, trails, things like that. And we have a Facebook group for our community. And I don't ever hear of anything out in the community, because Houston's so big. I use that as an example. I remember as a kid, or even when my daughter was a child, the library would do little things where the moms and the kids would come, or the dads and the kids would come and do activities, and they're teaching the dads or moms how to do things. I never hear about things like that right now. I don't know if you all do where you're at, but I think sometimes parents just don't know. Just in defense of parents, I knew what I was going to do with my daughter, but I have siblings. They didn't do the same with their children. Love them to death, nothing against or for them. Just that was the reality of my nieces and nephews. I think that you are absolutely right. Our parents have to become more involved, and our parents have to have the expectations for the kids at home and the support for the kids at home 155%. But I think that's, unfortunately, some don't know how to do it. And, maybe that's another thing that we all just need to think about, is how are we supporting our neighbor who maybe was a young mother? I became a mother as a teenager. How I got so good at being a mom was only because I did everything opposite of what my mom did with me.
Wow.
I'm going to be
Me too.
truly transparent. Yeah.
Me
And
too.
so it
Yeah.
wasn't like I went to a class. It wasn't like I had this great role model at home. As a matter of fact, my mother and I stopped speaking when I was 14 years old because of how tumultuous it was in my home. And I just vowed that I would not do that to my kid.
Yeah.
And that put me in a different place. But I left the norm of my family because of that. And it's hard to break those patterns. As I mentioned before, things happen in patterns. It's hard to break those patterns if you don't have the right support system either.
You know,
Well,
that's so interesting that we're
it's
talking
the
about.
mind.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, I was just saying, you know, that you were the young mother, I was the older mother. But when you talk about parents, like my ex-husband, the one thing he said to me is, he says, well, I'll give you this. You're a good mother. I didn't know you'd take it so seriously. And it's like, if you fail your children, you know, you have to pour into them. You have to pour in, you know, knowledge that a teacher can't give them from a different perspective. You have to pour in time with them. You have to pour in reading, playing. You have to incorporate everything, to me, into your children. And that, you know, and he called it unfortunate that they were my life. I found it to be a great honor to be able to take care of my children and be there for them regardless.
Wow,
But,
Nicole, did we marry the same man? I mean,
well, he traveled a lot, so you know what? Unless you saw him every day, are they Portuguese? Yeah, I think we've got some stragglers out there, but that's just my opinion.
But yeah, you're right. You know, and so you get it, you see it there. You know, you can be a couple with someone, you can build a life with someone and have two completely different philosophies.
And I did too. Exactly. Yep. I was very much a single parent in a married life. There's no doubt about it. That's the reason I got divorced. I was tired of having 3 children when I only had really 2, you know. But here's the thing, like I said, so first of all, we're getting to the end of our segment. So we wanted, I know time just goes by crazy, but let's talk about giving some tips of how we can support things. Let's try to be the difference of life, and let's try to give some tips on how parents can support their children a little bit better in whatever other ways. Please go ahead, Cheri.
Absolutely. And I love that you asked that question, because that was one of the things that I like to provide to the families at my schools, you know, in PTA meetings and things like that. But I think number one, and this one can be a little bit scary. You said, you know, a lot of people can't read and a lot of adults can't read, right? Yeah. But reading with your children is powerful. Sitting down with a book. And it doesn't even matter. I'm going to be honest with you. You could say whatever words you wanted on those pages. Young children are not going to know, right? But it's the bonding time that you have.
Oh, yeah.
It's the closeness, right? Maybe you use the pictures and you make up stories with each other. You know, it doesn't, it's that time together. And then when it becomes routine, and I know junior high and high school kids that love picture books still. You know, I read to my daughter, even when she was still in high school. We would do chapter books, of course, by that point, but it was important. I think the other thing that we have to remember is to talk to our children, not just say the words, how was school today? School was fine. No, you got to have a conversation. I got to a place with my daughter because she was a teenager. She went through all of this. How was school today? Fine, Mom. I'm going to go call so-and-so. Okay. You know, and that was the end of that conversation. So I turned it around to say, tell me the worst thing that happened at school today. And I always started with that one first to get that one out of the way. Right. And then I would say, now tell me the best thing about your school day, because I wanted to end it on a positive note. And at first she didn't know what to say. It was kind of, I mean, she's pretty verbal. She didn't know what to say, but, you know, I had to start guiding her. So I think to parents, I just say, you know, talk to your kids. Every year at the end of the year, I did end of the year awards with all my grade levels separate. And we made our 5th grade awards ceremony, very special because the students were leaving us and going to middle school. And that's what I would tell parents at the end of that ceremony every year. Your kids are going off to middle school, and there are 2 roads coming ahead of you, probably actually 52 roads, but 2 roads basically. One that's going to lead them to success, and one that's going to lead them on a path that's probably not the one you want. And it's going to be about you talking with them and getting to know their friends and knowing what makes them excited about life and knowing what makes them not excited about life, but having real conversations and not allowing just yes and no answers to things. You know, I remember my daughter saying, Mom, Susie's mom doesn't ask her all of these questions every day. And I said, well, great. Go live at Susie's house because your mom's going to ask you these questions, you know? And finally it was like, fine. But then when all of her friends would come over, it would be, hey, Miss Dixon, how are you? How was your school day? What's new at the schoolhouse? Because, you know, by then I was a principal and they wanted to know all the details, right? So, and all the kids hung at our house because it was about conversations. But I think the other thing is just that you got to believe that your kid is amazing. And you need to believe that your success as a parent is how successful your child becomes. Because like you said, Nicole, if you're not there supporting them through the whole thing, my daughter's 33. I mean, y'all's kids, I don't know their ages, but I know Glenda, we spoke, your children are older. She still needs her mom every day. She got engaged a month ago. And the night of the engagement, she kind of freaked out a little bit. I will say that. She cried a little because I wasn't there. And that says a lot. You know, that's the biggest day of her life. And she's like, wow, my mom wasn't here. And it's because of the relationship we have and the support system. So I think that would be my differences.
And I agree with that. Like I just married off my daughter, and yours and mine are the same age. And the same thing, you know, like we just love the fact of as we planned her wedding, we planned it together, every detail, every moment. And, you know, she just, even still today, like she says to me, you know what, I missed the end of August because we were working day in, day out together. I got to talk to you every single day. And I say, but I'm still here. I'm here to talk to you every single day. It's just you're busy with working now. But it's not the point. The fact is, you know, what starts at reading your bedtime stories as a little girl turns into now that there's a huge connection and you're planning your wedding together side by side because no other person she wants you to be there. So it changes, like what happens of what you start as a parent as when they're little turns into being huge, big, monumental things as they grow up. Because like you just said, my kids are both adults. They still phone and ask me my opinion. They still want to understand what I think of things. And you know what? That is a huge tribute to having a success in a relationship.
Absolutely.
And that's what relationships are. So for anybody who's watching, here's the other thing that I do want to mention that my parents always had, and I always had, which was a major thing in our household, is we had dinner every night together as a family. You know, the family dinners are some things of the past. Many families eat on their own times, watch TV as they're eating, or all other things. If you can still find, even if you can't do it day in, day out, but if you can, for the most part, sit down with your family as a family a couple of times a week or even once a week, what a change you can even do for your own family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then you're showing those examples for when your children become parents. And then that's a tradition. That's just a norm. This is how we do things. And then it carries on. Just like the bad things can carry on, those positive things can carry on as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And even if we don't believe it at the time, we are making an impact.
Absolutely.
We just don't see it maybe till later, but it's that important.
But
Even
your
in those
children,
teenage years, right? When they're like driving you crazy, or the first
Yes.
years of college where you're like, who are you? I don't even know you anymore. But then they come around, right?
They do. They do.
because no matter
They
what,
circle back.
because no matter what, your children are always watching you,
Uh-huh.
good or bad. You are the leader. So now I'm asking all you parents out there, become the leader. Become the leader that you are proud of. You are proud of that you are leading your children in a way to growth, to compassion, to understanding. Cheri, what a great question today, or a great subject that we went through today. It's obviously I'm very passionate about that. I think, what our world needs more of. And I want to thank you for bringing this up today and for giving us really a really deep look into where we are right now and where we need to really move.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys for having me on. And I love to speak about things that can just help make that impact on the world, because one at a time we can get there, right? One small step at a time.
And Nicole, we always have to hear what your parting words are, my dear. Yes.
You can't stop me, Glinda.
No, I don't, nor do I want to. Please.
You know what? One of the things that I take away from all this is how you're treating your children, how you're speaking to them, how you're talking to them. Let me just say, from doing quantum energy work, is they start embedding things in their subconscious when they're very, very, very young. And there have been times I've had to go dig that out from someone carrying that with them so long. You know, a lady that was 55 years old when we found out her mother called her stupid, never felt lovable. Well, she was 18 months old when she dropped a can of soup and her mother called her stupid. So I want you to just think about those little sponges and how they feel. And you have to correct them. You have to watch over them. I always told my kids, I've got to keep you alive till you're at least 21 so your brain can start connecting, So they just had to deal with me. But just think of what you're saying or what you're doing. Would you have liked that when you were a child? Is there another way to deal with it? Spatting someone on the mouth for talking, you're going to shut down their voice. And I don't like things like that. You can teach without hitting. You can teach without yelling, was how I did it. I certainly didn't do everything perfectly, but you have to remember, we don't own our children. They're there for a very short time, and we should do our best to make sure that they are kind, loving, compassionate, and sincere adults.
Beautiful. So true. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching us today. This has been a beautiful segment today, and I love the fact that we got down and deep and we talked really. Cheri, I would love you to come back again, and I think this is a subject matter that we do need to be talking about all the time. We do need to all start opening our eyes. And just like you said, Nicole, yes, none of us are perfect. But here's the thing, I remember at one point when I was going through early at the beginning of a divorce, and I was not myself and under a lot of pressure, and I was yelling at my kids a lot. And at one point I yelled at my son, and he came and turned around and he yelled at me, and I said, "Why are you yelling at me?" And he turned around and he said, "Because you're yelling at me all the time." Well, you know what? That was probably the greatest lesson that I could have ever had. And it knocked me, but it made me think, and it made me change instantly. So remember, first of all, we need to learn about ourselves. We have to learn that if we give ourselves love and respect, then we can give it, because we need to be it, first of all, for ourselves. And then we can do that. We can learn to teach our children to have that same rule in their life. Love themselves first, and then respect themselves, and then we go on from there. And that's what the world is supposed to be. Thank you all for joining us today on Let's Get Real. Please, this is a great subject matter. Share it amongst others. Give us a little love. You can also on YouTube, you can subscribe to us so you can watch us. And when we're back on again, we come on every single Wednesday, and we're here to make you start thinking. And that's what it's really all about. We've got to become more aware. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us today on a wonderful segment of Let's Get Real.